Hello, everyone. Uh, the Alumni Committee presents this IIITB Alumni Mentorship Series, which will be a monthly event where the members of IIIT community, Alumni Committee, will mentor the current students for their future PhD or MS applications. And to kickstart this series, we have Kumresh with us, an IM Tech alumni who completed his bachelor's and master's from IIIT Bangalore. And currently, he's pursuing his doctorate from Harvard, and his current research is focused on brain-inspired algorithm and brain-inspired computing systems. And with that, yeah, over to you, Kupresh bhaiya.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. I guess there are probably quite a few people in the audience who know what I look like, and just prove to you that I haven't changed. You can see me. And for those who are seeing me for the first time, this is how I look. I had a wonderful time at IIIT, and then I moved on from there to do my PhD currently at Harvard, like Sarthak already mentioned. And since this is probably the first of this lecture series on mentorship, I'm going to try and keep this as broad as possible, probably also short, and then we can have a good question and answer session in the end where you can air out a bunch of your concerns. And hopefully I address quite a few of them through the talk as well. At any point, if you feel like my audio is not clear or I'm talking really fast or you're not able to understand what I'm saying, please drop it in the chat or just find a way to convey it immediately, and then we can do something about it. All right. With that, I will share my screen, a tiny presentation prepared for you guys. So hopefully that serves well. So keeping in line with the theme of the series, I decided to title this talk, A Proven Path to PhD. As you can see, there's a guy here with so many different options to take, potentially leading to a PhD or research or MS or whatever the end goal is. And I guess this talk is going to focus on a proven path to PhD. What's the first thing that you need to know about a proven path to a PhD? That is coming up exactly in one slide. A proven path doesn't exist, is my answer. And that is an answer that I think a lot of people would give you. There are almost no guarantees for getting a PhD. That doesn't mean to say that this is entirely a lottery-based process or a luck-based process. It's just to go to say that what works for one person need not exactly work for the other. Just the way we have consumer modeling, or the way you design products for different consumers in different locations across the world, you will have to craft your own path to PhD. You'll have to find out what works well for you. You'll have to find out what works well for the institute that you're applying to, and put together something that they can appreciate and something that you can appreciate as well, so that it doesn't seem like a big bore. So major takeaway there is a proven path doesn't exactly exist. That brings us, the first part to a PhD or a research-based career is, who is a researcher? Right now I see that somebody's raised their hand, so you can go ahead and shout out your question. In case you are saying something, I'm not able to hear you because you might be muted.
Who is it? I just.
Shubhayu. Yeah.
Shubhayu. I don't even see him. Okay. This is interesting.
All right. Maybe we can get to that question at some point if you guys figure out what's going on, but otherwise I can just go ahead until then. All right?
Yeah.
Good. So I think critical to all of this research work is to understand who is a researcher. And just like with a lot of questions in this entire domain, these things don't have a clear answer. Here's a picture that I pulled out from the internet on when I typed in researcher. You have a globe here describing people from all across the world. Researchers are not confined to any location. Researchers can work on their computers. Researchers can work on data. Researchers can work on nature. Researchers can work on models, math, and so on. Researchers can figure out things from books. And still, that begs the question, who is a researcher? And some of that may have to do with coming up with new findings, advancing the existing knowledge in a particular field, learning something more about what already exists, adding meaning to things that have already been established from before, thinking about why certain things happened the way they did. All of these come under researcher. And a lot of times when you ask if this was an essay and you wanted to write some qualities of a researcher, a lot of you would pick up things like observation skills, dedicated working, and so on. All these are attributes that are often associated with researchers, but I'd like to tell you that you can always come up with exceptions for these. You can always find out some researcher who probably had things very easy, didn't have to put in the work that many others may have to. You can always find a researcher who worked on not necessarily too many keen observational claims, but just figured out a few things that worked quickly and happened. But at the same time, we want to give you an average general picture, which is why these terms of observation, these terms of pursuing something over a long period of time, dedication, these kind of attributes come up from there. What's the average expectation from a researcher? You can always find exceptions, and you finally have to carve out who you are in this context. And finally, what you have to address to yourself before embarking on this journey is, can you be one? And very related to that question is, how do you be one? And one of the easiest ways to start off this process of figuring out whether research is something for you at all is to see whether there is something that interests you at all. How can you figure out if something interests you? The more you explore. It is very easy to say, I want to work in this very niche domain without knowing too much of what's going on over there. Sometimes these kind of fantasies come up simply because it's a very lucrative term, bringing in a lot of money. Another reason might be because everybody is talking about it. Another reason might be because all your friends are going there, you just want to be in that company. And all of these ultimately matter very little. What matters a lot more is whether there is something there that piques your own interest. Are you going to be going and looking at something because somebody's asking you to, or are you going to be going and looking at something because you want to? And that is a major distinction. I see another hand raised. If we're able to take that question, great. Again, I'm not able to hear the question, so I'm not sure. Tejas, do you think you guys could help out?
Who raised it? I'm not able to see who raised it. Just one second. Let me see if I have the permissions. I don't know. I have the permissions. What is this? Oh, I'll look it up. Or could you tell me who's?
These just pop up as notifications and go away. So all I know is somebody raised a hand.
Okay. I think people may have mistakenly done that. But if they persistently put their hand up, I'll let you know.
All right, no worries. I will just continue then, going ahead. So till now, I've been giving a lot of abstract answers about who is a researcher, what does research entail, what are some common attributes associated with researchers, and whether that is actually the true case or not. Why don't we go into a couple of very pointed topics on applying for a research position? Maybe PhD is something that is a point of view that I can take very easily. Before I go there, this is just in relation to the previous thing of who can be a researcher. I just typed in researcher on Google and just went to the images tab and took a screenshot. And this is exactly what comes up when you say researcher. I just want you to look at these images for a while. I don't have too much to say now, but I'm pretty sure you can look at each of these images and come up with at least one exception to research that doesn't happen this way. I'm just going to pause. You can take a look at this for a couple of seconds. This is exactly what Google throws up. Working with chemicals, sitting in front of a computer, working in front of a microscope, and so on. But you can see how varied a bunch of these pictures are, and you can get a sense of how varied research itself is. And that is to say that proven paths don't exist, and a clear-cut answer to who is a researcher also doesn't exist. But now we move on, having decided probably at some point that you want to go ahead in this research route and try it for yourself. What is a major thing that probably is a central feature to this talk also is the application process itself. Now, the application process is something that a lot of you might be familiar with, at least what terms go into the application process. So why don't I list out a couple of these terms and then we can take a few of them in detail. Tests. Probably all of you have heard of standardized tests like the GRE and TOEFL and so on, and probably believe that those scores are critical to the application. I see that there is something in the chat. I'm going to open that up.
No, it was just me.
That's all right. That's all right. No worries. Good. So standardized tests form one part of the application. Definitely a critical part, but I want to caution you saying standardized tests are only one part of the application. And especially in recent times, many institutes and universities are moving away from these kind of standardized tests. And it would definitely make sense to go and look at these institutes and their requirements before going in and investing your time and money in standardized tests. There was a raised hand, so you can go ahead, unmute yourself and talk.
I don't see any raised hands. Just
I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. But just 1 second. I'll do this. Yeah. Please, Ovais. Wait, Ovais here.
Yeah, this is always here.
Yeah.
I would like to ask. Can you hear me?
Is he muted? I can't hear.
I think there's an audio problem.
All right, if you could, always if you could type out your question in the chat, that also works, and then somebody can convey it.
Okay.
Yeah, you're audible. You could just ask. Yeah.
Okay. Is my voice clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. I was asking like whether can you refer any good source materials or like any tips or things like how much time should we contribute to like for preparing these tests and all, if we are like planning to give them in the next 3 months or so, like what should be our method of approach to these tests?
Sure. That is an important question. Why don't we just touch on that since we're on that topic of tests, right? So let's say now you have gone in and figured out that the department, university, place that you're applying to actually requires some of these standardized tests. And maybe you're on a time crunch. You have, just like you said, maybe 2-3 months ahead. And what should you focus on? My general understanding is as follows. These tests have two parts to them. One would be a verbal reasoning part, and the other would be a quantitative reasoning part. For a lot of the education that we have in India, the quantitative part is a lot easier for us than the verbal reasoning part. This is, again, a general opinion. There may be exceptions, and those you'll have to figure out on your own. But by and large, the quantitative section is going to be a lot more easier for us. I would definitely recommend using the official prep source from the GRE websites, which is what I went ahead with. I'm not a big fan of dedicated coaching simply because that time investment and approach didn't work for me. But if you're the kind of person who learns very well in a classroom setting, then it is definitely worthwhile enrolling in a crash course or a quick program, especially given the time duration that you have. But I would spend more of your focus on the verbal reasoning part, because that's where a lot of discomfort tends to show up. Because in our general use, we're not used to reading long paragraphs, long essays, and then trying to extrapolate and figure out a lot of details. And that's a skill that is often required as a researcher, to go in and read a short piece about any topic and kind of get the gist of what exactly is happening there. So I would definitely suggest you focus a lot more on the verbal reasoning part. And with the quantitative, typically just going through and solving every kind of practice exercise that's available in the official prep book would be good, simply because it'll give you a flavor of all the possible question types that can occur. A major source of error in quantitative reasoning is generally just silly errors, silly mistakes where you like forget a negative sign or something like that. And the more you practice, the more you know which kind of errors you are more likely to commit, and you can just look out for them during the exam day. Having said that, once you do go through the entire preparation part, I think it is very important for you to get a feel for the actual test itself. So doing at least 2 to 3 practice tests is something that definitely helped me. And I've heard from a lot of people that helped them too. Typically do your practice tests in the same time that you would be writing the exam as well, so that your mind is kind of focused for that entire duration. So in terms of source materials, like when I went and gave my GRE, I followed only the official prep book, and I took, I think, 2 or 3 practice tests. I think 2 come with the book and 1 other was available online, which is just a random search. But other than that, if you're a classroom learning person, then you could definitely consider enrolling in a quick course. Does that answer your question well?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So that, like we were mentioning, is one ingredient in the application. And it is starting to become more obsolete right now because a lot of universities are moving away from it. Side note, why are they moving away from it? Over the years, people have kind of done some number crunching and figured out that high performance in these standardized tests is not exactly correlated with the quality of research that is being produced by the student. And then a little deeper digging kind of revealed that a lot of these are just business opportunities for a couple of organizations to provide their tests and have people answer and get some kind of income from that. So a lot of universities and departments now are moving away from these tests. So you should definitely take a look and see whether the place that you're applying to actually requires this or not. Another ingredient that a lot of you might be familiar with is essays. Most of the admission committees want to know who you are as a person, who you are in terms of your studies, and who you are as a person too. And a lot of that will come across through this essay. And here, everybody is going to say things like, stay true to yourself, try to figure out and package yourself in a way that the admission committee wants to hire you, and so on. But central to all of this is also bring out who you really are. The admission committee is not interested in seeing whether you are who they exactly envision you to be, but they want to know who you really are. And that's what comes out through these essays. And quite often, these grand openings, cliche phrases, thought-provoking starts from using quotes of people who are already experts in the field. These were tried and tested methodologies about a decade ago, and it became so overused. People often shy away from these kind of beginnings right now. what I would advise is stay true to yourself and keep a story going. People want to be engaged with you. People want to understand who you are, and why have you done what you've done. As long as you can put this across in a reasonably fancy way, people are going to value that. I'm not saying that it guarantees anybody anything, because guarantee is a word that I almost never associate with admissions and PhDs and so on. But what people are looking for in an essay is some true value. It's very easy in general, for people to figure out if something is made up or not. So if that ever is a question, always go for bringing out who you are. I'm unsure if some people have some questions, so you can go ahead and mute yourself and talk. If there's anything, I'll pause for a while. All right, maybe that was just a casual unmuting, but let me go ahead and discuss a couple of other ingredients in applications. Here's another part that probably a lot of you are familiar with: recommendation letters. These are people who vouch for your credentials, people who vouch for the kind of person you are, people who can vouch for the kind of work that you do. And quite often in the academic setting, these are professors in your college. And it is important that the people who you approach to write recommendations are not people who you've probably just interacted with once in a course, or they've just taught you without knowing too much about your work style or having worked with you a little more closely. The reason this is very important is because anybody can write a recommendation letter vouching for a student, but often the insightful information for all of this comes in only when you have actually interacted with the person at a level that is more than just the classroom setting, maybe on a project, maybe a classroom setting plus regular interactions outside the class hours, something like that, where they can actually add some insight and value into who you are. They have a sense of how your work has shaped up, how your path through college has shaped up, and so on. And it is only then can the admissions committee where you're applying to get a sense of who they're actually dealing with and how people perceive the person that they are going to be dealing with. This is very different from somebody coming and saying, oh, this is a person who took my class and scored an A and has this GPA and went for an internship here and there, so I think they're a good fit for your program. That is a very generic one, and I'm pretty sure every person can write this kind of a recommendation letter. Whereas somebody who's able to say, when we work closely on this particular project, the student came up with this idea which changed the course of this, or the student raised one or two important questions which helped us validate a particular part of what we were researching, and so on. That actually adds a lot more value and insight into who you really are and what you're doing. So when you're choosing people who will vouch for you, vouch for your credentials, always keep this in mind as to who can provide insightful information about you. Now, a very incorrect interpretation of this would be, I have to go and be chummy with every person who teaches me just because I could potentially ask them a recommendation letter at some point. That, I would say, is probably not the best way to go about this in sourcing a recommendation letter, but there should be an organic process where you are actually involved in the work, they're invested in how your career is going, and you also have had interactions outside the classroom. A more healthy way of doing this. Does that make sense? If there's anybody who has sudden thoughts about the recommendation aspect, I'll pause for a few seconds and you can ask me about it now.
Can it be someone who has not necessarily taught us a subject, but he has like been a great help during the course of the project?
So,
He is a senior.
right. So as long as it's a faculty member who has interacted with you at a project level, I think that is definitely a good sign and you should go ahead for it. Not necessary that all your recommendation letters need to be from people who have taught you a specific course. These may be people who have provided valuable insight in your project, valuable guidance through your career trajectory in the college. All of those are valid, and they all lend a different flavor to vouching for different aspects of you, if you can note that. And all of that is very beneficial.
Also, an important question. What if you're changing streams? Like, I am from an electronics background, but now I'm working in the computer science field, IT field, and I plan to do my master's in the same as well. So now, if like since my project was like from a different stream, would it hamper my application?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. So the way, how about I get back to this question in like a minute or so, all right? And then after that, if there's any follow-up, you can let me know. But I will
Sure,
keep this
sure.
and I will answer it in a minute or so.
Okay.
The part of this ingredient to the application process that I wanted to mention here are credentials. Now, credentials come in different forms. One obvious credential would be academic credentials. And there we are often used to thinking about grades, GPAs, and so on. Another aspect of academic credentials is research experience. What have you done in the past to support your interests going ahead? Have you worked in the same field? Have you worked in a different field? Do you have a sense of what it is to do research? Or are you just entering there because somebody else is going, or you had no other alternative? So these are important. Also, an often ignored part of credentials is who are you outside of academics? If I just remove studies as a component from your life, do you bring any value addition to the table? Are you able to contribute, engage with the community at levels other than simply academics? And that's a very important aspect. It's becoming increasingly important in the present day and age. So this ties into the whole concept of holistic development and building yourself into an all-round individual. It doesn't mean that you need to have your foot in every single thing that the world has to offer, but just to show whether you are something without the academics. And often this is a big value add to the community, and it is something that people definitely value. Whether it be volunteering service, whether it be some kind of sport interest, some kind of music interest, and so on. These are definitely valued as important components as part of your credential, what you present yourself as to the admission committee. Now I'm going to go back to the question that was asked a little earlier about research experience in a field other than what you're applying in. There are also a couple more questions, which I see in the chat box that I will take right after this. So the thing about admissions committees is they want to know whether you can do research. And the way we addressed the topic of research in the previous slides was research is not focused on entirely one domain. You can do research in multiple domains. You can switch interests. You can do whatever you want, but as long as you have a reason for doing it. I myself did not do things in a single domain all through. I went from computer science to a more biologically inspired computing kind of domain. And in order to do that, I did have to switch fields. Not most of my research experience was in the same domain that I'm doing my research in currently, or actually most of my research was not in the same domain. But that did not stop me from providing these examples as justification for my research capabilities. And I think it is more important for you to show or demonstrate that you are a good researcher, because research skills are easily translated from one domain to the other. As long as you have a valid reason for why you want to switch fields and how that's making sense in the larger context of things, nobody would have any issues. It won't be a drawback. Definitely, once you have identified a particular area as something that you're interested in, if you are able to supplement that claim by adding some kind of experience in that domain, it definitely boosts your application. But at the same time, you don't have to neglect experiences that were not in the same domain because they just lend credibility to your research capabilities. And I think that's also important. I see a couple of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to address those. So one of the questions I have here is, how important is it to have diversity in terms of the area of work in the recommendation letters? I feel that there is no clear-cut answer to this. If you have worked in projects or domains other than just the one that you're applying to, it is definitely beneficial to have people vouch for your capabilities in all these domains, because that just goes to say you are not fixed on a single domain, or your skills are not entirely concentrated on a single domain. Your research capability, your focus, and your dedication is able to translate across domains, and you have been showing some kind of promise regardless of the topic that you choose. And I think that is very important. So having diversity in the recommendation letters is definitely beneficial. If they're all from people in the same domain, then that also doesn't necessarily hamper your chances, because that goes to say that you have taken the initiative to work and supplement your interest area in so many different ways. And people who are relevant to you in that field can also vouch for you. This is all a question of how you spin the argument, and neither of them is really wrong. But all of them are going to help your application in some way, because what people are looking for is there somebody vouching for your credentials? And if there's any follow-up to that, maybe I can take that later. And another question here is, what is a good time to give the GRE? That is something that will, again, like every question over here, have a varied set of answers. For example, I gave my GRE in the 7th semester of my college, I think. Was it 7th? Yes, 7th semester or 8th semester of my college, yes. A lot of people generally give it in the beginning of their final year, like the summer before they apply. And I think that's a reasonable timeline too. But at the same time, if you want to take some time earlier and prepare for the GRE when you have maybe some downtime on your coursework, maybe some downtime on your further research experiences, not thinking about a thesis and so on, if you want to do that, that would be fine too. Ultimately, you need to figure out whether the time frame that you're setting allows you enough time for preparation, and at the same time, it allows you enough time to put together an application after you have completed the test. Both of these are very important. Another question that's being asked is, how would you deal with the uncertainty of being admitted after submitting the application? I'm not going to answer that now, simply because there's no answer, but I will address it in some capacity a few slides ahead. All right. And now moving on from this entire very heavy application oriented part, I just wanted to touch on a couple of worries that I've heard from a lot of people taking up PhDs or thinking about taking up PhDs. One of the most common concerns is research is just studying more for a long time. While that may be true in some capacity, I don't think that does true justice to what research is. First, it won't be such a big burden if you're truly interested in what you're doing. If you're simply doing research because somebody wants you to go ahead and get involved in a particular topic, that is going to be very different from actually going and taking up a particular domain simply because it interests you and you can go ahead and read something about it, do something in that domain multiple times. Timescales is also an important aspect to the PhD, and I think it is definitely normal to be concerned about timescales. This entire duration of a PhD often varies from discipline to discipline. More theoretical domains have often shorter PhD times in the order of about 3 to 4 years. A lot of experimental PhDs where you actively do a lot of experiments, get results from that, and the timescales are longer, would take on an average maybe 5 to 6 years and so on. But regardless of this timeline, I think the benefit of just doing research, if you're really interested in it, kind of outweighs the entire time investment that is going in, because what you get out of it is probably going to be much higher. Another worry that I've encountered from people before is this question of how do I know what I'm interested in? And this kind of seeps in when probably in the third year of college or so, where you're probably interested in going to research, but you honestly don't know how to figure out what you're interested in, or it's hard to figure out whether something interests you. And I think the first step there is to actually take a deep breath and calm down. Nobody is going to fault you for exploring a whole bunch of options. And in the process of exploring options, you will most likely narrow down at least on a broad topic or a broad area that you are interested to go ahead and look at on your own. The other alternative that you have is you look at all of these topics and you realize that none of them interest you, which is also a very important thing to know. If none of them interest you, then you can start thinking about alternative strategies, alternative domains to consider, and so on, right? So this concept of how do I know what I'm interested in is very tricky, but exploration is the key. And that's where everything begins. And there's almost no recipe for you to figure out that here I have 3 tick boxes and now I know that I'm interested in a particular topic. More often than not, things are not going to work this way. And exploration, again, I come back to the same point that exploration is the key. One of the other worries that I've come across from a lot of people is research implies constantly churning out revolutionary ideas. It's like you're always inventing, discovering a new thing at every corner in that journey. And that is not necessarily true. And I'm not going to expand too much on that right now, but I'm going to leave you with a tiny visual over here on a topic of data analysis and tell you that although the analysis is very sound, it is probably very shitty research. So it may be a revolutionary idea, but it may not be worth anything at all. Here is something that I pulled up from this website called Spurious Correlations. Here's a graph of total revenue generated by arcades and their correlation with the computer science doctorates awarded in the US. These are 2 variables that probably don't have any relation to each other, but if you just look at the data and plot it like this, it seems like there is some major correlation between the 2. And somebody can go ahead and call this a revolutionary idea simply because it hasn't been done before. But is this really research? Is something that you'll need to ask yourselves. Not all research is going to be churning out new ideas. You'll have to validate them a lot. Sometimes a lot of research can just be building on existing knowledge, clarifying previous concepts, pointing out flaws in earlier work. Those are also very credible forms of research. I have a question here from one of the attendees on what about the publish or perish mentality? How active is it abroad? So a lot of domains right now are trying to move away from their enforcement of publication. What is a publication ultimately? A publication is just a way of you communicating an idea or a thought process that may be of relevance to that particular field. The more likely it is to get published means the more likely it is that the idea is very relevant and has some implications to the field. And this publish or perish mentality is probably something that has crept in over the past decades. And that has often also created a hierarchy of these are conferences and journals that I really uphold, acknowledge, and these are some others which I can ignore, and so on. My personal take on this is nobody is necessarily out there to do bad research, and all of them are trying to contribute in some way. Now, it is unfortunate that we have this kind of publish or perish mentality, but a lot of universities, departments, and so on are actively trying to move away from it. And it is something that will have a major effect if you worry more about it. The more you enjoy your research and go along that trajectory, the publications and the scientific communication aspect of your research will typically just follow. It's often a byproduct of research, and it is not a goal of research. I think once that mindset is set from the beginning, then things should be a lot more easier. All right. I'm not sure if there are other questions. Here's one more. What would be red flags in your transcript? Okay. Red flags in the transcript are generally aspects of your transcript that cannot be attributed to any valid excuse or reason or explanation. Something as simple as the transcripts are supposed to show people how dedicated you are to your work, how much you can focus on your work. Now, if you had some issues at a particular point in life which affected your work, that is a perfectly valid explanation which you will cover in other aspects of your application, like the essays and so on, where you can exactly say why a particular period was really tough for you and how you were able to surmount your difficulties and emerge out on top. Now, if that is consistent with the fact that your scores or your work ethics and capabilities outside that phase have been reasonably good, then nobody is going to hold those against you. Where people hold things against you is when there are inconsistencies in what you claim and what you show. I think that is the biggest red flag that you can have in your entire application package is inconsistency. This doesn't mean that you fabricate the same lies everywhere, but it goes to say that you have to bring out exactly who you are. At the same time, if you have a valid explanation for certain flaws, then it is better that the committee knows about it so that they can at least say, look, here's a person who knows exactly what they were doing. They know when they had a low period. They have the ability to come out on top despite difficulties. And that is actually a very beneficial quality for a researcher, because research is not going to be all roses and hunky-dory all the time. You're going to have multiple periods where you may feel like things are not going your way. You might be focusing on a few things that are not working at that moment, but eventually you'll want to find a way to overcome all of that and finally come through with your research. And these are qualities that would often be appreciated, but they can only be appreciated if they're conveyed, right? Another person asked me, is research something like exploring every possible way or thing that a field can do? In some sense, yes, and in some sense, no. I apologize that all my answers are a yes or no type, but that's just the nature of this field itself. So the reason I say yes or no is because when you start considering different angles and different aspects for the same field, that gives you so many possible avenues for research. But a single research need not cover all of them. But if you go in with the open mind that a particular thing could be thought about in many different ways, that allows you to come up oftentimes with more innovative solutions, more interdisciplinary solutions. You can also draw inspiration from other fields and put it into practice in the same field. And it also gives you different ways of looking at things which may explain phenomena that couldn't be explained before. So I think the yes part of my answer is to say that it gives you an open perspective, but the no part, because a single research need not address all of those, but it's a good mindset to start off with. All right. In the interest of time, I am going to move ahead on this presentation, and we will take a few more questions going ahead later. I briefly wanted to touch on what does research entail? Is it domain specific or not? Oftentimes, coming from a computer science or technology-based institute, we're often blinded by this notion that research and technology just go hand in hand. And that is not often true. Technology has multiple aspects to it. Research has multiple aspects to it. Finally, in a lot of these domains, there are going to be consumers of your research. There are going to be mindsets, trends that are prepped in over years. You could talk about why certain things are the way they are. That is also valid research. You could talk about why certain technology had certain impacts in a particular place, didn't have impacts in other places, helps you understand your technology better, helps you understand your consumers better, helps you market better. That is also important research. What I'm trying to say is research is not necessarily correlated with developing new products. There are so many different avenues where you can do research. And to this effect, I think I'd like to briefly mention that I think a lot of you would be aware of the courses in the integrated MTech program, which are related to humanities and social sciences. And you're also aware that IIIT has a program on a topic called digital society. I think these are topics that are less heard of over the past decade or so, but are gaining a lot of importance now, simply because there are so many different facets to technology and so many different facets to research and so many different facets to understanding what goes on in providing things to consumers that haven't been addressed before. And this is an aspect that hasn't been adequately addressed by even a lot of companies now, which are pushing in a lot of their investment on figuring out, how do I cater to the masses? For example, an Amazon strategy that works in the US need not work in India, or oftentimes will not work in India. What is it that could allow certain kind of strategies to succeed in different places? Understanding those kind of aspects are also very important. And I come to understand that recently the college is offering a specialization even in these kind of aspects. I think digital technology, like I think along these lines, I'm not sure what the exact name of the specialization is, but I would definitely point out here that it is something you can definitely consider doing going ahead. And that research isn't necessarily just technology and products. That's something important to bear in mind. I have one new question over here where person is asking me, when should you start emailing professors whose work interests you? Should I mail them after taking my GRE and other tests, or can I mail them before that, and what the content of the mail should be? So that can often be done probably in the spring before you apply for your PhD. So say you're applying, if you were to apply this year, right? So if you're submitting your applications by December 2020, then I would have written to them probably by March, April or so of this year. The idea is this will allow time for you to set up maybe a conversation with them, engage with their research, understand better, and also be a little more clear about where exactly you are in terms of your research interests and research areas and so on. There is no hard and fast rule that you need to talk to them only after your GREs. I think the only suggestion I might give is talk to them after you have a better sense of, at least a broad sense of what you want to do and why you want to do it. You're not going to be going in there to receive all the information from them. You're going to be going in there to tell them that you have plenty of this information and you find them a good fit, and then you're asking for their opinion. So I think that is an important balance to draw. All right. Let me just check if there are more questions in the chat box. What do PhD people do and how do they achieve a PhD? So this question, I think right now, is a very profound one. People in their PhD try to advance the knowledge of a particular domain to the best that they can. I think that is probably the most abstract and inclusive answer that I can provide, regardless of the domain that you take. As long as you're adding to the knowledge pool within that domain, That may be in terms of a theoretical research, that may be in terms of a product, that may be in terms of explaining something that was not known before. All of these contribute to research and a PhD, and this is exactly what PhD people do. We try to advance the existing knowledge in a particular domain. And how do you achieve a PhD? There are two ways to look at this. The way I would look at it now is in terms of requirements for graduation from a particular program. And that depends from university to university, field to field, and so on. A lot of these constraints often tend to be publication oriented. But like I said before, if your focus is on research, then the publications are just a byproduct and they will come. If you treat publications as the goal, then you're often going to be narrow-minded and blindsided throughout the entire PhD process. And the reason I'm going to leave it at this is because how to achieve a PhD, how to enjoy it, and so on are questions that even people who are doing their PhD grapple with on an everyday basis, which is why I am going to leave this answer at just that. As what do PhD people do is just try to advance the knowledge in that domain to the best that they can. All right. Now, for the last bit, I think I just wanted to briefly touch on are there any guarantees for a PhD? I think this was kind of addressed in all the discussion that we had before. This is a possible candidate GPA score. Does this guarantee a PhD? Probably not. What about one recommendation from a professor saying, this is my best student? Does that guarantee you a PhD? I think you probably know where I'm headed with all these answers. All these answers are going to be probably not. This is a sample GRE score, pretty high one, but does that guarantee you anything? Probably not. What about internships? You had the whole talk about internships in this domain, internships outside the domain, how much should you do, when should you do, and so on. Probably guarantees that somebody might take you seriously, but does that guarantee you a PhD? Probably not. And you can ponder about this a little later as to whether there is anything that can guarantee a PhD. And more often than not, you're going to come up with no. And this entire thing is about maximizing your chances. The reason I say there are no guarantees is sometimes you can talk to people, you can talk to professors, set up everything, but things may not click simply because there was no funding available for that particular year. Maybe that particular professor was not accepting students that particular year, or the government decided to cut funding for one particular research group for that year for international students. These are all factors that are outside your control, which can often play a role in PhD admissions, which is why I say you are trying to present the best version of yourself to them, and you're trying to be true to yourself. But beyond that, there are almost no guarantees in the PhD process. Just like there are no guarantees almost anywhere there's a selection process, it boils down into PhD as well. I thought I'd briefly touch on my journey over here. I'll try to keep this as short as possible because this is just one sample case and we can have time for some discussion or talk later. I started off here taking a lot of core courses in computer science and electrical engineering and so on, electronics and stuff. Where I finally landed up is in brain science and trying to figure out brain-inspired computations. And as a domain, I call this computational neuroscience. And what did I do along the way? I tried to shape up my coursework in a way that allowed me to take this transition. At times, it would seem like I have no courses with any of my classmates at all. But this does not go to say that I didn't value any of them or I didn't want to be with them. It's just that you have to figure out a set of courses that work well for your interest area. This may often end up being things like taking reading electives and project electives for specialized topics that are not offered as a regular course. And if that is the case, so be it. You should go ahead and take the time to learn a little more about different domains before falling head deep into them and saying, I'm going to partner this domain for years to come. So that can be a way to have your coursework aligned with your interests. I had an internship in my, I think this second year summer, and this I did at the Indian Institute of Science. And this was, again, a very computer science oriented, machine learning oriented internship where I worked hard over the summer for about 12 weeks or so. This was not a paid internship. Sometimes early on in your stages, you're going to have to compromise a few things. Pay may be one of them. As long as you are gaining valuable experience out of the entire endeavor, I would say go for it. So this was probably the first exposure that I had to research, and I found it extremely endearing to me because I found the nature of the work and the just nature of research itself to be very appealing. And that's how I shaped my future coursework and my future internships along the lines of research. I would say going in and doing a research internship is probably one of the best ways to figure out whether a research environment suits you, with the added disclaimer that not all research environments are the same. So there's probably additional considerations that you might want to take in. I had another internship the following year arranged through the college to work at MIT Media Lab. And that kind of just served as a justification to myself on how much research was really close to my heart and how I could go to a new environment and still transfer the skills that I've already had. I think that is a valuable quality for any kind of researcher, for you to take your skills, go to a place and add value to the place. And as long as you can do that, any community will value you. And that's something that you should definitely keep in mind. I was lucky to receive this information about a program conducted by Harvard in Bangalore. And this program was titled Introduction to Brain Sciences. And this was a time when I was actively looking to transition from the computer science, artificial intelligence version to more brain-inspired versions of this. And this came in handy because over here I could interact with a lot of people in the domain, a lot of faculty from Harvard who I was able to connect with going ahead, and just a lot of colleagues from India who were kind of like-minded, came from different backgrounds, and just served as a good intellectual environment. It just went to show that I could probably make this transition from the background that I have to the field that I wanted to go to, simply because it was a domain that was actively being pursued by a lot of people. Then, of course, came the whole thesis route. And what I decided to do for my thesis was to bank on the networking that I'd already done in my previous years. And I was in touch with a faculty from one of these programs, the workshop that I had attended from Harvard. And this person kindly agreed to co-supervise my thesis. So I wrote the thesis with a supervision from a professor at IIIT and a professor from Harvard. I'm not saying that everybody has to go this route, but establishing some kind of connection, a meaningful connection at a place that you are interested in going to, will go a long way in supplementing your research claims and supplementing your experience and providing a complete package when you're trying to apply. So that is definitely something that I would like all of you to keep in mind. We already touched on how I approach my standardized tests, GRE and the other English requirements and so on. I took them in my 8th semester simply because I felt that I had the time to do it then in a more relaxed manner before I start getting a little more serious about my thesis. Whether I got serious about my thesis after that is a separate question. The answer is no. But at least when I started off, I thought that the timing of my GRE was based on me wanting to focus a little more on my thesis on the entire final year and not have too many of the application things bogging me down at that point. Of course, the application prep, we've touched on this almost through this entire talk, what it entails. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just to know that probably from the summer onwards, kind of methodically gathering information about universities where you want to apply, what the requirements are, and figuring out how best you can present yourselves and weave a story for exactly how your journey has been is very important in presenting yourself to an admissions committee. After you submit your applications, this is one of the questions that was asked. How do you handle the uncertainty? One option that you have is to just sit there and bite your nails. The other is to just sit, and the other is to worry. I don't have a great answer on what you should do after you submit your applications, because that's just the nature of the field. You will submit your applications, and the whole surety factor comes in with your choice of universities, how you can choose your universities, and so on. And that is probably a topic that might be addressed in future sessions also, because I don't want to burden you all with every single possible information right now, because you can also reach out to me separately and we can have discussions on that. But this is to give you a broad overview on the things that could go on. And once you bite your nails, you move on to the next step in life. And hopefully that means you have succeeded in getting your PhD. And just in order for you to keep in mind, who are you outside the academics? It's a question that I raised a little earlier, and that is important in presenting yourself as a human being to the admissions committee rather than just somebody who is a book, right? Probably my last slide over here, just the takeaways from this session. The first part is it's never too early and it's never too late. We have people in the audience in their first year who are asking questions, very important questions, and that gives you the time to shape things in a particular way. We have people who are on the cusp of applying to their PhD, and you will have a sense of exactly what it entails and how you can best shape yourself and shape your application package with the time remaining. This, again, we touched on, stay true to yourself and not the admissions committee. Remember that they want to know about you. You don't have to necessarily put what they want to see. You just have to go ahead, show yourself the way you are. And if there are any aspects of your credentials that you feel need separate justification, provide those. And at the same time, enjoy the whole process. But in that entire process, a constant question that you should be asking yourself is, what value are you adding to the community? Is there some reason why somebody would want you beyond just the fact that you're going to do research? Because ultimately, humans are a social species, and we're always going to be embedded in a community. And people, it would be nice for people to see value that you bring to the community so that it can be a wonderful experience for you as well. The last two takeaways that I want to mention are things that you should probably keep in mind all the time. Success is rarely achieved overnight. There are always going to be exceptions to this statement, but by and large, success happens over a longer period of time, takes some kind of compromise, investment, planning, and so on. And last but not least, success is also subjective. So you can't keep evaluating your success based on other people's parameters. You will have to figure out parameters on your own to evaluate success for yourself, because ultimately it goes to say whether you are satisfied or not. And that is kind of where I'm going to leave you for today. And we can open this up for question and answers and so on, as long as people want to stay. I guess I was like 5 minutes over time. I'm sorry about that. But I hope you had a good session for the introduction to this entire world of PhD applications, research, and so on. All right. Thank you so much again for having me here.
Thank you, Kamresh. That was very insightful, I guess, for everyone. So we have the floor open for a couple of questions. You can either ask them in the chat box or through the Q&A box.
I think I have given them the permission to unmute themselves and ask, so they can go ahead. Yeah.
So we have a couple of generic questions that we would try to ask in between. So I'd start with that. So how do you choose how to choose a supervisor, or which university do you want to apply to?
How do we choose a university and a supervisor? Right. One way, once you're kind of clear or have some idea about which kind of area you are trying to pursue, I think since PhDs and MS and so on are more research intensive, you could look for people who are doing interesting research in that domain. And obviously those researchers are often going to be associated with particular universities and departments. When you go there, you will have your initial list of wonderful places to go to. And at the same time, you should also focus on a few places where, unfortunately, the academic world is structured in a way that there are places that are hard to get into, and there are places there where good work is going on, but it's a little more easier to get into. While choosing a university, you need to pick a good balance between the list of universities which are top tier and where phenomenal work is going on regularly, and mix with that a couple of universities where they're doing wonderful research, but at the same time, they're probably a little more easily accessible, easier to get into compared to the others. Now, this list of universities will vary depending on the field, the program, and so on. So that is something which is going to take a lot of initiative from your side to go and look at different programs and figure out how does that program appeal to you. A couple of parameters that you can use to evaluate this is, what is the structure of the program? Where do people go after completing that program? And whether whether there's any widespread opinion about that particular research group itself or that professor itself. So these are definitely good starting points for you to figure out universities. And in terms of professors, I think you could use similar parameters to evaluate them, but at the same time, interacting with these people is the best way to get a better perspective. One way to interact is to write to the professors. Another way to interact is to, typically if you go to the web page of the particular research lab that you're looking at, there will be a list of people and their contact information. These are the students who work in the lab. Sometimes reaching out to them is also very beneficial because you get a student's perspective on exactly what's going on. I guess that's kind of what I have on that question. Do you guys have more that have come up this way?
There are a few questions in chat as well.
Kumar,
Sure. Let me open up the chat.
Kumesh, I have a question. I'm Shri from 4th year IM Tech. So what kind of professions do people get into after PhD?
The correct answer for this is going to be pretty much anything. But if you're looking for a vast majority, many of them try to stay in the academic zone. So after a PhD, they do what's called a postdoc, which is a short form for postdoctoral fellow, where they go ahead and do some more independent research at a different lab. And from there on, try to figure out an opening as an assistant professor or an entry-level professor, so on. So that a lot of people tend to do this. Additionally, there is a need for a lot of skilled labor, skilled research in the industry also. So the entire research and development division of pretty much any organization is always open to anybody finishing their PhD. So both the industry and the academic domains are open. People also finish PhDs and come up with business ventures where they start off their own spin-off. So pretty much no avenue is closed.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Good.
So what would be some important timelines and checklists for the whole application process?
Okay, timelines for the application process. The first thing to start off with, I think it's very critical, is whether you are even remotely interested in research or not. And it would be lovely if you can kind of know this about a year or so before you apply. because then you can start shaping things in this direction. That's not a hard and fast rule, but I'm trying to give you like the ideal scenario right now, because checklists are always ideal, almost always ideal. So the first step is to figure out whether you're even remotely interested in research. The second step is to figure out what kind of area, maybe a broad domain, is it that piques your interest. After you do that, I think it is important to see how you can build your courses or your credentials and experience along those lines. The next step, now I can probably start giving you a little more specific dates as terms of like timelines. You could reach out to people, faculty, students, and so on, the spring before you apply in order to figure out whether there's some potential match for the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that you're interested in, and what they do. Then comes the whole standardized test timeline. The standardized test timeline, again, we already touched on the fact that it could be a little variable, but definitely I would have it completed by June of your application year, which allows you to have your entire final semester without the burden of an application weighing on your head, the standardized test weighing on your head. So before the start of your final semester, I would typically have knocked out the standardized test. Now comes the essays, where you try and figure out a good way to portray yourself, this whole conveying yourself to the admissions committee part, right? So there, I would say start off slowly in the summer, gathering points, gathering ideas that you want to convey, and then slowly start putting together in a story. I would definitely recommend having somebody who has already gone through this process go over your essays. I'm also happy to do that for anybody who's interested. So I'll probably share my contact details with all of you a little later. So once you have methodically figured out how you want to package this essay to them, then you will probably spend a little time putting together all of this material and identifying who will be providing recommendation letters to you and which combination of faculty makes the most sense for the program that you're applying to. Once you have all of that out of the way, this probably by September or so of the application year, this now gives you literally 2 to 3 months of just putting all of them together, piecing things together, following up on different deadlines. And I think that would make a really comfortable application process. There are probably specifics that I didn't address over here, which may be covered in the coming series or can be covered by me at a later point, even one-on-one. That's good. I have another question here in the chat about topics of interest seem to be very vast. For instance, neuroscience can be approached from a lot of domains. How do we explore these fields initially when we are yet to have some firsthand experience? I think I'm not in a position to give a clear-cut answer to that because this is a very customized thing. It all starts from some kind of fascination or curiosity that develops inside in you, or it may also develop through a particular course that you naturally take up during college. I'm unsure on how to answer exactly how to explore these fields initially, because I don't think there's a one strategy fits all kind of solution. But if you are considering research as an option, I think one question that you can always have at the back of your head is this something that I can do without being asked to do? I think as long as the answer to that is yes, there's always some potential for research over there. Another person asked me, can we do part-time research in foreign universities while parallelly working in industry remotely in India? Some of them do offer these opportunities, but again, you will have to visit each of these universities and departments individually to figure out which ones allow you this flexibility. But the answer to your question is yes, these kind of luxuries do exist. So I'm not sure if we have any more questions, but at the same time, I hope this was informative as an initial discussion to get the series rolling for all of you. And I hope you enjoyed this and it wasn't too boring. I know I've kept you all up on a Saturday night. Here's one more question. How important is a thesis when we want to pursue an MS or a PhD? And how do we approach a professor for a thesis? Do we need to have a structured idea or will they provide us with the subject? The answer is it's a mix of both. A thesis is often very beneficial, in my opinion, if you're going to go the research route, because it shows that you've actively taken a lot of interest in doing this kind of work before. Now, approaching a professor for a thesis is, as simple or as complicated as going and telling them, I would be interested in working on this particular topic, and this is something that you're experienced in. Will you be willing to let me work with you on this? But this whole part of having a structured idea versus being provided with an idea, it's going to be a mix of both. Because when you go for research, you're not going to be spoon-fed and handheld all through. So there's going to be a little bit of you trying to figure out a few things on your own. But for an initial spark, there is no harm in asking a person what are some available avenues that you can explore, so that from there on, you can build on and look at interesting questions that come up from there. So the idea would be to get your broad interest areas across to the faculty so that they can provide some specifics, because after all, they are experts in the field, or definitely a little more of an expert than we are. So then they will be able to guide you on a few specifics, and you can take inspiration from there and actually work on a few of those, and then try to come up with a couple more interesting avenues, angles, questions to look at, which you can then build into a discussion and work with the faculty. These don't have to be isolated events, but they can all happen in parallel. I hope I answered that. So another question that I'm getting is, publications play an important role in strengthening our applications, but how likely are they willing to take you in if you do not have publications by the time you apply? So the quick answer to this is, these are all just ingredients to the application, right? So a good way to combat or outweigh your lack of publication would be to demonstrate adequate research experience or work experience, or something to show that you are able to take active interest and pursue something for longer periods of time out of curiosity, awareness, excitement for the field itself. Publications can often be a gamble. A lot of people do understand that. And I will confess that if there are two people with the same qualifications, experience, everything, but one of them has a publication in addition to everything else being the same, then you are right that when it comes to a final filtering criteria, one might be preferred over the other. But you do realize that this is very rarely going to be the case, that two identical candidates show up. So it's all a question of where are you able to demonstrate your skills? If you're able to demonstrate your dedication, work, passion, and so on in many different domains, many different ways, with a lot of experience, but none of them necessarily resulted in a publication, there's always a way to package this in a way that you say, we have worked on all of this, and we could consider turning this into a publication at some point. And yes, this experience could be from the industry as well, because ultimately, what are we trying to do even in the industry? We're trying to make something beneficial. We're trying to work on a particular idea, strategy for a longer period of time or a more dedicated period of time. And as long as those qualities are being highlighted and vouched for, it is all great. The reason why I said at the beginning, consistency is probably the most important factor for your application is simply to account for all of these kind of factors. You may be interested in research because you went to the industry and figured out that that probably doesn't suit you well. And you went to a research internship and figured out that that suits you well. And as long as you can put all of this across as a reasonable story, as a reasonable convincer for anybody reading your application, then the rest of it really doesn't matter. I, for one, applied to a pretty hardcore biology program, having not taken biology since 10th standard. And people were still willing to read my essay, and turns out they were open enough to admitting me. So I'm sure that definitely all of you can have the same kind of fate as well. It's all about getting across to the admissions committee exactly why you want to do what you're trying to do and how you've shaped yourself along those lines and whether you are consistent in your thought process. I think that's the most important thing. All right, I feel like we should be closing the session now. So
I think we can wrap up the session, and thank you, Kubesh Bhaiya, again for providing these insights towards research. And thank you everyone for joining. And we will have our next session in January. So, bye-bye.
All right. I can probably send across my contact information to you so that, or if you already have it, you can pass it on to the others if they want to reach out at any point. I am happy to talk to anyone at any time. All right.